When I had my teams at Google, I always tried to make decisions that were in the best interest of most. And I think they don't think that way. That's not good enough. Who are you trying to serve? Why is it that people like us who do believe in consciousness, conscious leadership, conscious capitalism, why are we not going into some of these leadership roles, whether in corporate or in government? A system has been created that doesn't support our values. Can I change it? It's hard. Let's face it. It's been hard. We have to start somewhere.
Welcome to the Let Me Save You 25 Years podcast. Not just another interview podcast. Instead, we jump right into a new Shawnism each week. Each one of these is a lesson I've learned, usually the hard way, along the way, in hopes that you can maybe learn from my mistakes and build great things, even bigger, better, faster than I ever did. These are simply true principles and useful tactics for success in life, not just business, unpacked in great depth by extremely successful people each week. My book, also called Let Me Save You 25 Years, where today's topic comes from, is intentionally really short. So think of this as the long version where we can go even deeper into these topics. Today, we have an expert on the topic, someone who builds teams professionally and has for decades, to go deeper on Shawnism number 23. We can all win together. All right, the story from the book that builds into this topic is Sachs IPO, initial public offering on NASDAQ. We had built the business for 20 years, from 98 to 2018, and finally got to kind of that 100 million in sales mark. Finally, after, fits and starts of making money here and there, from a profit perspective, got to, solid path to profitability. And this is in the context of businesses that are just losing money all over the place, raising crazy money to go public for billions in valuation. We're like this wiry, 20-year-old startup that took forever to get to that level that other companies just kind of bought their way to through private equity. And, being the challenger, the come up, the underdog, it felt so appropriate to be able to capture the ticker LOVE, love. I mean, this is a company built on love. This is a company, the first half of our name, the most powerful word in the English language. And somehow it's a whole other miracle. I don't have time to unpack here. It's in the book. Got the ticker love on Wall Street. We're really proud of that. A chance for myself, for all of the people involved, Dave, Jack, Donna, Doreen, just like the dozens of people who had stuck with it to build this company, some of them for decades, way for them to be able to cash in their ownership that they'd earned, being a public company. Our suppliers that had lent us millions in the form of, releasing container loads of goods. At times I couldn't pay them. it was a phone call. Hey, Christmas is coming. We need the goods. We don't have the cash. Can you please just release the goods to us? I promise we're good for it in January. That had happened for years and years. And now Sachs on solid footing, being able to raise tens of millions of dollars through the public markets to just give us a stable, reliable source of funds to continue to grow the business on. And I like to say the earth benefited from our IPO in the sense that we now have this Design for Life business model ready to take to scale. So really proud of that. How does this bridge into the topic, let us all win together? Well, all of these people, all of these constituents, beyond even our own employees, benefited from Sachs winning, right? Now our suppliers are paid on time all the time. They're not worried anymore. They benefited from their taking the risk. And even though we were kind of on the small side for a company moving toward an IPO, I felt like the company was just barely mature enough. And I think on solid footing, really rooted in the concepts of conscious capitalism. So one of our private equity firms turned me on to this book written by John Mackey, who's been on the pod, and Raj Sisodia, conscious capitalism that celebrates the idea of stakeholder capitalism. And if that's not something you're familiar with, think of it this way. Every business has dozens, probably hundreds or thousands of stakeholders, but at least half a dozen that we could just list on a piece of paper. What's a stakeholder? Well, we all know what shareholders are, right? You own a piece of a company, you own the stock in a company. And for many decades, dating back to the 1970s, Milton Friedman, famous economist, who argued that companies should not be at the whims of the CEO or leadership and whatever they wanted to donate to or do with the money within that company. The CEO's role was to drive value for shareholders, for investors, to build that company's value and make money for investors and nothing else. But that concept got kind of rooted in a lot of business teaching, business schools, et cetera, and really drove a lot of efficiency in businesses that could really make tons of profit by just focusing maniacally on, hey, we're going to go to one ply toilet paper in the bathrooms to save another, few cents kind of mentality. And for decades it was that way. And obviously America thrived in business for many decades. Conscious capitalism builds on this thought that isn't unique to that book, but has been percolating now for a number of decades, that businesses and organizations in general really should consider all stakeholders, not just shareholders. So anyone who is affected by your business. So this is your employees, maybe the families of your employees, based on their own life rhythms and mental health, your suppliers, the community where you operate, the environment. In our case, Lovesac, we're pulling wood and metal out of the earth to manufacture products, energy, electricity. All of those stakeholders, including the earth, are affected by our operations. What are we doing for every one of those stakeholders? How are we thinking about that? Of course, shareholders and the ownership of the company is a major and maybe top of these stakeholders, but all these stakeholders should be considered. And so that's a concept that I think is tied really closely to this idea of how we can all win together, really thinking about what does all mean when we're talking about all winning together. And the answer should be all stakeholders. And that pulls us back to conscious capitalism, which is something we celebrate here at Lovesac and required reading at Lovesac, John Mackey's, Raj Sisodia's Conscious Capitalism. Finally, I've reflected a lot on culture. People ask me all the time, Lovesac seems to have this awesome culture. How do you get that? How do you do that? Especially after 2.5 decades in business. My simple answer to building a great culture ties back to Shawnism number 1. Just do something. Just try stuff. When you have a whole team of well-meaning, intelligent, capable people building a company together like we do at Lovesac, there's a new idea every week. Hey, why don't we try this? Why don't we do this? How cool would it be at our annual events if we did it this way? Or, how cool would it be on the calls we have day to day if we open them with some chit chat or this or that? Whatever idea is birthed by these wonderful, capable, talented people, try them on, do them. And look, you can't just run around doing everything. So the trick is really to gather the ideas, prioritize them, and build teams and systems to methodically bring them to life. And I've found in this way, you can build a great culture if you just try. And if you just try things on and do things and see what sticks, and some things work and some things don't. And that's the way to build a sustainable culture. So we're going to unpack all of these ideas around winning together, culture, hiring, building teams that are effective and powerful on today's episode with a real expert. How cool is it to have someone as adept as one of the leading recruiters and team builders in the world on today's pod? I look forward to that conversation. Here we go. It took me years before I was willing to be humble enough, open-minded enough, trusting and bold enough to pay the money to use a proper recruiter to hire key positions in my own company. Of course, when I finally did, my business exploded thanks to the magnitude of talent that is actually out there once you tap into it. Our guest today has spent decades helping companies do exactly this and developing the leadership within her own organizations to magnify that effect. A French linguist, an MBA from Northwestern Kellogg, once director of recruiting at a little place called Google, inside of 30 years of recruiting and management experience, now host of the top-ranked Fifth Dimensional Leadership podcast and authority and author of Career Mapping. We welcome to the podcast the eminent Ginny Clarke.
Shawn, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Oh yeah, I'm excited and intimidated all at the same time. This is great. No, you're a wonderful person, beautiful person. I love all of your content on Instagram. I've benefited greatly from just honestly just binging it. So where are you? Where do we find you today?
I'm in Chicago today. Just came in from Miami last night. So yeah, sunshine in Chicago, 40 degrees, all good.
Okay. Not bad.
Yeah.
Not bad. Post Miami.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ginny, when you heard this topic, we can all win together. One of these Shawnisms from my book. What's the first thing that came to mind when you heard that?
Yes, it was the first thing that came to mind.
Okay.
It's not that hard, but it requires a different mindset.
What mindset?
I talk sometimes. I have one of my videos, a YouTube video on unity consciousness. So without diving into that spiritual orientation, it starts with a mindset of collaboration. It's not you versus me. It's not, it's an abundance mindset instead of a scarcity mindset that says it has to be you instead of me.
Okay,
There's plenty here for all of us.
I have to stop you right there because I feel like I agree. I love where you're taking this. Can you quickly unpack an abundance mindset from a scarcity mindset for everyone? Because these are like big buzzwords. These are big topics out there, but some people hear them, but what's your best explanation of?
I'll try to keep it simple and in just, layman's parlance, if you will.
Please.
The scarcity, I think, is what's very common. It's it's also what I would suggest might be a more pessimistic orientation that says, I can't do this because there's not enough money, there's not enough time, there aren't enough jobs. That's a mindset. And I think very often people read the news or they hear things from folks and they think, well, that's a fact. That's a belief. And many beliefs are not facts. And it informs how you now perceive the world and in turn, what's going to happen to you. If that's your mindset that says, I just can't get ahead. I come from this background, whatever the statement might be, it typically is rooted in fear. Almost always scarcity it's fear-based. Whereas abundance is based, you can call it a more optimistic orientation, belief that there is indeed enough for all of us in the world. There's enough. And we deserve to have the abundance that's here for us.
I observe that, the news and media and just media broadly benefits so greatly from fear, from stoking paranoia, etc., that I think people can't help almost from falling into that scarcity mindset. I don't think that most people would call it that, but I think that's exactly what it is. And this abundance mindset, there are two great books that come to mind that I think of because I'm a big book, reader. One is Abundance from nearly a decade ago, which gets into this topic, and there's a newer one called Super Abundance. I don't know if you've read either of those.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, but
I'll check it out.
This idea of abundance is really interesting, and for me, not a lot of people know this. I have this little morning mantra. That's what I call it. That I say out loud. That I read myself. It's like so self-helpy, whatever. But our language, as has a great effect
Yes.
whether we're talking about plants, whether we're talking about, molding rice, right? We've all read these studies,
Yeah.
whatever, but
Water.
our language is powerful. And I say
Uh-huh.
these things that I hope to be true, that I hope to live up to. And one of the lines from that is, I do not operate from a place of fear, but abundance. And it's because if I'm not careful, naturally, just as a human on
Hmm.
the earth, it's really easy to just be negative and make decisions. And then when I catch myself making a decision where it's like I'm really worried,
Yeah,
I try to flip it and think, how could I operate? How could I look at the same situation without any fear?
that's right.
And that's where I try to push myself. What's your experience in that realm?
Oh, I think that's the perfect way to approach it. It's what are the possibilities, right? I mean, ultimately, that's what we want. And there are infinite possibilities. We often go to the worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
That's called worrying. Right? And a lot of people live with that mindset. Well, if I
Yeah.
didn't worry about it, then, well, think about if you didn't because you knew that something good was coming, because that's what you set forth and that's the energy that you're going to draw in for yourself. And if it doesn't end up the way you wanted it to, my belief system says, then I was supposed to learn something from that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
nothing bad can ever happen. It's about reframing, right? It might not be what you wanted or expected, but it's something that needed to happen.
I
And
love
what
that.
role did my mindset have in that outcome?
Nothing bad can ever happen. Things happen,
Yeah.
and we either, benefit or learn or
Yeah.
both, but nothing bad can happen. That's really interesting. And you really believe this?
I do. I mean, people might say, well, something catastrophic, someone dies or
Mm.
something. Is it bad? Did it need to happen for the benefit of maybe the person who didn't want to be here?
Mm.
I mean, we're getting way out there because we've been really trained to think that some of these occurrences and they might be horrific, and there's war and there's all these things.
Yeah.
But when you zoom out, why? Why? And what role did I have? Was it completely out of my control? Probably. Then is guilt a helpful sentiment here? People love feeling guilty. That's my other that's one of my gripes in all of this. I don't do guilt.
Wow.
I don't. I it's to me it's a useless shame, guilt, a lot of these emotions that we love to hang on to where we feel like we're commiserating with others and we're connecting with others. I choose not to go there. That's rarely, I can't think of ever helping me. Do I have concern for others? Am I empathetic? Absolutely. I feel
Yeah.
deeply.
I love
But
that.
guilt, useless.
Yeah. That's really, I don't do guilt. So, how do you tie a bit of where we've just seen the conversation go back to we can all win together?
Yes.
How do you tie that back to this idea?
Well, I think it's simple, and thank you for bringing back to that, because it's a matter of what can we take and do together. There's so much separation between us now. I'm real clear on who I am. I'm clear on who you are based on what you tell me and what you show me.
Mm.
Let's find a way to do more together. I don't need to see you as an enemy
Yeah.
or someone who's not maybe even neutral. I'm going to assume that you want to see me be successful because I want to see you be successful.
Well, and that would be that scarcity mindset that we started on, right? Like
Yeah.
you seeing other people as any kind of threat or really competition or whatever.
Hmm.
Even your competition, like I found that in business. Like it's wild to me how you can look at competition as some kind of, enemy, or you can just look at competition, like literal competition, like,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
firm is competing with mine, as another entity on a playing board.
Yeah.
And actually, as we all know, in capitalism, competition is key. I mean, and
Sure.
capitalism has driven more abundant outcomes. A lot of negatives come along with capitalism, but I think the argument's made clearly that capitalism has driven more abundance than almost any force on planet Earth, I think, as
Hmm.
isms go.
Hmm.
So
I
how do
think
you
that's
think of
probably
that
true.
as a participant in capitalist society, as a driver of efficacy and efficiency and teams and outcomes? How
Hmm.
do do you have any thoughts on in that realm?
Um, yeah. Should we go to capitalism, or did you want to stay a little?
Wherever you'd
Okay.
like to go, I don't care. Actually, you pick.
um,
You pick the path. There's so many branches here.
there's so many different directions we can go. Maybe we do talk about capitalism because and I think conscious capitalism
There we go.
was a book, right? And I
Required
think
reading at Love Stack, by the way. Conscious Capitalism. John
you're
Mackey. He's been
right.
on the pod. Love
Oh,
John.
neat. Yeah. Um, and I'm totally in alignment with that. I think there is this consciousness. There are a couple things maybe that we can get into. One is around conscious leadership, because you think they kind of go hand in hand. I do a deeper dive into the behaviors of leaders, um, and those behaviors that I think demonstrate true consciousness. The five dimensions of leadership is something that I've
Yeah.
created, so we can talk about that. But also, I've zoomed out and I've looked at. There's a great book. I don't know if you read it, "The Man Who Broke Capitalism" by David
Mm-mm.
Geddes. It's I think it's brilliant, and I happen to have met him. It came out 2022, I believe, and he's a New York Times um, journalist. So you
Mm.
can imagine he had access to a whole lot of data. And his point is, it's about Jack Welch, and
Oh, yeah.
he's he's given him a rough time. But what I took from it was, as I look back, I came out of business school as Jack Welch and GE were. I mean, they were the Academy company. When I got to
Yeah.
Spencer Stewart, we all just kind of assumed that some of the executives who had GE, that the senior most, were great,
Yeah.
right? And what this book is really pointing out is Milton Friedman, right, with this whole
Yeah.
shareholder value, was the influence for Jack Welch. Jack Welch became the poster child for capitalism and shareholder value, and he did it at all costs, and it cost him in the end. But as I thought about that and how things have changed and what we were emulating in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, right? This is all Jack Welch's heyday.
Yeah.
Um, we lost sight of community. We lost sight of, in some cases, diversity. What is the organization? And there was a quote from a CEO whose company had been bought by GE. And he was saying, this was really painful because they laid off a bunch of people after they bought it. This was the LBO, the leverage
Yeah.
buyout days, and this individual was saying how it really hurt his heart to see employees from his community whom he knew personally lose a lot of their wealth as a function of some of the things that were happening in this new wave of how to do business at all costs to increase shareholder value.
Hmm.
So that's some of what came to mind. And then to put a fine point on it, I believe he says that CEOs made 50 times the annual worker's salary back then,
Mm-hmm.
okay, in the 70s. Now, I think by the time Jack Welch ended, I think it was something like 900 times.
Yeah.
And now I've seen numbers as high as 6,500 times
Wow.
what workers are making. So we're paying our CEOs dollars that are so ridiculously inflated,
Yeah.
and there's no alignment to the actual value.
Well,
So
and
I
this
think
is
to me, that's where I'm kind of looking at when I think about capitalism. We've lost our way.
and this is something I think about a lot because as a CEO,
Yes.
that conundrum is so fascinating because on the one hand, that's the landscape. like at the end of the day,
Yeah.
you know, if you're qualified, let's say, or perceived to be qualified to be a CEO,
Mhm.
you're competing, as you know, as a recruiter, you're competing against other CEOs
Sure.
that are paid X or Y.
That's right.
And if I can go get that job, you're going to have a hard time holding on to me. So
Mhm.
that's where like the natural forces, let's call them, or
Mhm.
unnatural forces of capitalism have brought us to this point that to your point is probably unhealthy
Mhm.
and distorted.
Yeah.
Yet it is an outgrowth of where capitalism is sort of naturally and competition has sort
Yeah.
of naturally arrived at. So how do you reconcile? Because theoretically, if you believe in market forces and the I guess classical underpinnings of economics and capitalism,
Mhm.
then that should somehow be self-correcting. So now, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I'm not an economist, so I don't know that I'm going to give an answer that an economist would appreciate.
That's fine.
But I think we're starting to see elements of it by increased talk about unions. You
Mm,
know, we're trying to find some entity to which these and to whom these CEOs and beneficiaries will be accountable.
yeah,
Boards haven't done it, right?
yeah,
They're not. They're. It's in their. It's not in their self interest.
yeah.
So I think that this is one of the reasons why I'm really committed to empowering people in the workforce to exercise their agency in speaking out on the way they're treated, the way they're compensated,
Hmm.
inequities, these kinds of things. And I don't know, I'm hopeful at some point in the near future, in my lifetime, we'll see a correction. It might be painful because nobody who's benefiting is going to, very few people who are benefiting are going to want to share, if you will,
Well,
right? Or rebalance the structure.
for those who are listening that are not swimming in the rivers of private equity, venture capital, uh, big business, growth business,
Mhm.
I will share an anecdote that really like slapped me in the face. I'm at a mixer once with our bankers. We've gone public. I'm invited to all of these events with investors and bankers. The businesses are put on display, and
Yeah.
investors are allowed to poke and prod and get to know people. And anyway, I had this private equity person kind of put his hand on my shoulder and say, Shawn, now that you've come this far, let me teach you one of the most valuable lessons I learned from so and so, former CEO of Coca-Cola, whatever. He said, a company is nothing more than a machine from which you can extract wealth.
Mm.
And
Wow.
I'm standing there as a founder who's trying to build, as we put it, I mean, we're building an organization with love in its name, Ginny. It's hanging over my door. It's my ticker on NASDAQ.
Yes.
And we
Yes.
and we came up like a weed through concrete. Like Love Sex Story, if you had to look at it,
Yeah.
it's just nasty, gnarly, rough. I've had every up and every kind of down, embarrassing failures, and somehow we've survived to this point. And I think it's given us strong bones. But as
Mhm.
a founder, that is kind of a rarity. As you know, we're almost 6 years public, and I'm the CEO still, thankfully.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer now in. I mean, I don't even mean this to toot my own horn at all. What I'm saying is, like, as I've observed the landscape, I'm a big proponent of founder leaders if they can be conscious enough to hang on. My consciousness was forced on me through all the brutalities that I've experienced. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yes.
and I lost a lot of my ownership through, full reorg and all this other stuff, which is, and in a way it's good because
Mhm.
it's forced me to really be sharp. Like I can't just be super fat and happy and super wealthy like some of my peers who have
Mhm.
just been made crazily rich at young
Mhm.
ages, and
Yeah.
then I think they lack the motivation to stay sharp, stay
Mhm.
conscious, stay self-aware.
Yeah.
And having had that said to me about wealth extraction, it's really opened my eyes to a big reason that I observe many companies are the way they are and capitalism has devolved to the point that it has devolved to is because without that quote unquote kind of founder energy, and it's not just about founders because there are problems too in their own ways.
Yep,
and I know that.
for sure.
But without that passion for really building something, like forget the money, like let's build something amazing and not just a product or a machine to make money. Let's build an amazing culture that people love. Let's make this a place that doesn't suck to work. Like without that kind of energy, founder or not, I'm afraid that venture capitalist was right. That to many people, including executives that are professional executives, companies become these machines from which they can extract wealth if they are devious and capable and smart and see. And by the way, they're allowed to. And in the end, what happens is organizations are not built by passion. They say they wrap themselves around DE&I, or they wrap themselves around sustainability, or they wrap themselves around these different movements. But meanwhile, what it is a game of wealth extraction. Have you experienced that? Have you observed that?
Yeah. Pretty much everywhere I worked. Yeah. With the exception of the prison. Yeah.
With the exception of the prison. The prison. Let's talk about the prison. Oh my gosh. You lived in a prison. Can I say it that way?
Well, on the grounds.
Wow.
I was not incarcerated. My dad was
good disclaimer. Wow.
My dad was a superintendent of a correctional facility. And then
so
later,
there must
many
be
of them.
dramatic learnings just from being, involved. Like, what were the big takeaways from that environment? Because there you have a more unnatural environment. What did you learn?
I'll tell you the first thing that comes to mind that I observed was what an amazing leader my father was. I didn't have the language then. I visited him wherever he worked growing up, but I think I was 6 or 7 years old, and we lived on the grounds for 3 years. And so I didn't have language about what it was, but I just was always so amazed at how my father treated everyone, the staff, right? Meaning the people who work there inside the facility, the inmates or the wards of the state, as they were known. When I was young, when we were living on the grounds, these were young men in some cases, and this was many, many decades ago. So in some cases, these were runaways. They hadn't, many of them had not committed serious crimes. Now, later I worked in a different facility part-time where we had more serious criminals. But my dad showed people respect, and he was empathetic. He was tough as nails. You did not cross him, but he heard you. He listened well, and he respected what you had to say. And he respected you as long as you were, honoring him, not beholden to him, but being respectful of him. It cuts both ways.
So how do people that don't exemplify those values that you just listed, for instance, get so far in leadership? Because there are people who do very well, it seems, in management or leadership that do not exemplify those fundamental values of kindness, respect, empathy, toughness, maybe, but willing to listen. Like, how do you reconcile that as a people person who's recruited and placed and observed and dissected? Like,
I've thought about this, and because I've seen all types, and some have just been horrendous. And you're going, how does this happen? I'll say simply, it starts with an over-indexation on pedigree, very often. If not someone who's just outright a relationship. I like you, come work. It's a relationship based is a very common way to hire, and I think it's a very weak way to hire. Just because you know somebody doesn't mean they're the best at what you're asking them to do. So that's one. The pedigree is the other one that I think is weak. I often say, being educated doesn't make you smart, and being smart doesn't make you competent. And I observed many people who have very impressive resumes who, in the end, don't turn out to be competent. Um, and competency to me is, first of all, there are leadership competencies and there are functional competencies. And I think very often people mistake someone's domain expertise or functional competence for leadership competence, and they're quite different.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why you end up with people, aside from the common, oh, they're my friend, or we're in this together, that loyalty factor of I'm going to look out for you, you look out for me, regardless of what I do, you'll have my back. That's shady. Let's face it.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. That's not serving anybody's interests except the two people who are in agreement on that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me, those are the reasons why we see this so frequently, where you have leaders who are not, they don't care, they're not empathetic, and the system is breeding that behavior if they're only looking at performance and they're not looking at what the employees might be saying. They're not looking at employee relations data. They're not looking at, attrition and retention data that would suggest that there's a problem with the leader. Because, if you've got somebody who sucks as a leader, then why don't you make him an individual contributor and just sit there and be smart all day?
Yeah.
So you aren't doing harm to people. But a lot of people in the workplace are suffering right now because of the treatment from the leaders.
Yeah, I think that phrase, so you're not doing harm to people, is really poignant. And the idea that people get promoted because they're really good at whatever. And to your point, they can be super competent, but that doesn't mean that they have that kindness, willingness to be respectful, ability to be empathetic that you described as in your father, who was, by your observation, a great leader.
He was.
You're looking back, and that's a great perspective. And that's what an amazing example to have as a young person, whether you knew it or not. And so I find that interesting. I think, like you just teased out, a classic juxtaposition between crony capitalism, to assign it a label, and conscious capitalism that is not yet even. I don't think conscious Listen, I think most leaders that I've observed, like when I go to the summit every year, conscious capitalism. Have you been to the
I've
summit
not.
before? Yeah, you need to speak there.
I'd love to.
Yeah, we'll connect on that. But most people that come for their first time to the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit in Austin are like, this is news? Like, isn't this just the way you do things? Because most people that are attracted to that already have those attributes that you sort of described, right?
That's
and so
right.
it just seems obvious. But to your point, there are so many leaders in business and in the world, forget business, whether you're talking about probably colleges or
everywhere, every sector,
and that don't display good behavior, because to your point, they might either be an expert in some field, but rank poorly on those leadership dynamics, but they've just been promoted, or B, they are fundamentally Machiavellian, and that's how they've gotten ahead in life.
That's right. Yeah, because at some point, whether an act of omission or commission, they have been allowed to behave this way.
Yeah.
There's no feedback that says, knock it off. That was a phrase my father used to use. And when you heard knock it off, I mean, as a child, he would tell me and my brother that meant we stood still and we stopped, roughhousing. Or I'd hear him say that to his employees in the wards, knock it off. You knew, not cool. So there are boundaries, and I think we've ceased to have respectable boundaries of behavior.
So how do you speak to, let's say, people out there listening, maybe that aren't, CEOs or in positions of great leadership, but that are interested in these topics? So the topic today, we can all win together. Okay. What can I do about that? Where do you start?
I'll start by saying, when I talk about leadership, there's sort of a dual meaning. One is people with the title as a leader, overseeing other people.
Yeah.
But I see each individual, I don't care what level, you're a leader. You're leading your life. You are leading your career. You have the ability, you have agency.
Yeah.
I don't care what your title is and how many rungs below the top in the hierarchy you might be. And that's again part of a mindset that people need to adopt, because I don't believe in victimhood either. So no guilt, no victims.
Yes.
Um, so to me, it really starts with this sense of this is what I can do, and I'm going to start actually by telling the truth. How about that? Let's start with the truth. At
Love
least
it.
my truth. I'm going to tell you what I sometimes it's my truth. This is my experience. This is my lens. There are very few absolute truths, but in the workplace, there are often shared facts that people are operating from. So let's make them fact based, based on
Yeah.
some truth that we can all agree to.
Yeah. I can tell you as a, I guess, official leader, whatever that is, as a CEO. I
Titular.
mean, yeah, as a leader, we put out, our confidential, what is it called? Uh,
Your
like
employee
our,
engagement stuff.
yeah, our engagement surveys that are completely, why am I blanking on the
Anonymous.
word? Anonymous.
Anonymous.
Sorry. We put
Yes.
out our
Yeah.
anonymous engagement surveys to get real feedback. And I think people are always leery. Like, is it really anonymous?
Sure.
Am I going to
Can we
put,
trust you?
and that's understandable, but I can't tell you as a leader how much we crave
Mhm.
that feedback, even though it's painful, some of it, like, even though, and look, we're big kids. We're ready for the pain. We can't fix it all the time immediately. It takes us years to fix things culturally. Cultures are hard. Cultures are like, giant oil tankers or something, that you can't just turn them around.
It's
You have
true.
to change policies and change compensations and change structures. And these things can take years then to play out. And people may choose to leave in the meantime. But I can tell
Mhm.
you that feedback is so valuable. So I love what you said.
It is.
Speak up, tell the truth, even if you think it's not heard. And just
Mhm.
because things don't change, I can just say this from my seat. Things do change. You just don't necessarily see it. And you may not even live long enough or choose to live long enough in that culture to see it. But you still played a role if you spoke up and told the truth. And this is
Yeah.
coming from my seat. And
Yeah.
so I really appreciate you encouraging that. And secondly, I'd love to get into, because this is a topic that I am wildly passionate about. One of the other required readings at Lovesac is a book called Insight. I don't know if you've read it, by Trisha
Mhm.
Urick. It's a great book. It builds on Daniel Goleman's, uh, emotional intelligence, and it's a
Mhm.
book really all about self-awareness.
Yeah.
And I have said for years that, in my opinion, the secret to success, of all success, is self-awareness. Like, that's at
I
the root,
agree.
because if we can be really honest with ourselves and not lie
Mhm.
to ourselves,
Mhm.
then all of these other things can grow out of that: kindness, respect, empathy, even toughness,
Yes.
balanced by those things. And so
Mhm.
I know you're passionate also about of self-awareness. Drop some wisdom on us in that realm.
Yeah. Self awareness is one of the key attributes to being a conscious leader. You have got to know who you are. So the five dimensions of leadership that I created are: know yourself,
Mm.
self awareness, um, speak your truth, inspire love, expand consciousness, and activate mastery. Those are the five things.
Wow.
And so the focus is really very much about you. All of those things you need to get focused on before you go into the world, because now you are embodying those things. And hopefully, I also believe when you're talking about culture, that the culture is an amalgam of the behaviors of the senior most leaders. you can say anything. Working at Google, people are like, oh, it had to have this great culture. Well, it had a lot of activities and a lot of fun things that people thought would create a great culture.
Yeah.
Those things don't, by definition, create the culture. Culture is what you swim around in. It's the soup that you're in every day. It's
Yes.
intangible. It's a feeling. You can
Absolutely.
have lots of microcultures depending on the leader and the tone that gets set by that leader. And then there's likely an overarching culture.
Yes.
So I think people need to understand their role in shaping culture day to day. What level of openness do you have, right? What level of feedback are you giving? How much are you listening to others and getting feedback as well as giving it? Um, what is the level of tolerance for bad behavior? Because
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of it across
Yeah.
sectors. Every year we hear about somebody who takes a fall because they were behaving badly. Every
Yep.
year, I mean, every day, just about. I mean, right? So I think we have to consider what are the boundaries that we put in place of what's acceptable behavior and how are we holding ourselves and others accountable for it.
Yeah. Accountability, the way I like to phrase it, and this is a really purposely crass phraseology that we use at Lovesac, is it's your fault. And so when I meet people their first week, and I try and meet everybody we hire at Lovesac,
Mm-hmm.
because I just believe in, I believe in people fundamentally,
Yeah.
and I want to know them. And we're remote first. And so we're not together every day like it used to be. Like we went there through COVID. I'm really proud of it, actually. And we're recruiting great people because of it. But I tell them every time I meet anybody, look, if Lovesac's culture is good, and that's the reason you came here, and in fact, there are good aspects to it, and it remains that, or it falls off, like in a few, whatever, if you observe it over the next few months, few years, it falls off and becomes something that, you're no longer proud of. It's your fault.
Say something.
And by the way, I can see like it's sort of like a bucket of cold water on them, and I let it sit
Mm-hmm.
for a second. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not trying to abdicate my own responsibility. I'm trying to make the point, like, you're part of it. How you show up, how you behave, how you speak up, to your point, or you don't speak up,
Mm-hmm.
that will affect this culture. Now, on the other hand, if it's true that Lovesac has a good culture and it remains that way and thrives and gets better and healthier,
Mm-hmm.
it's your fault. You built it. You did
That's
it.
right.
And that's been a very powerful phrase, because I think this is one of my beefs with the word accountability. Is it's one of these words that gets thrown around, and it's the right
Yes.
word,
Mm-hmm.
but it's one of these words that people have a hard time. It just is like one of these big words that's sort of
Yeah.
like, what does
Empty.
that mean? And it's like a big
Yeah.
official word. And so I like saying stuff sometimes really crassly, because
Mm-hmm.
people get it. And so I found success expressing it that way.
Yeah.
And I love that you're a champion. I love your whole framework. I think it's brilliant. I think we'll need
Thank
to
you.
probably work together. But I also love that you couched it. I say this all the time, like, you're the CEO of your own life. And that
You
may
are.
sound silly, but like, life decisions are hard, man. You're
Mm-hmm.
balancing, your well-being, your finances, your children, their
Yep.
well-being, health, navigating in the world, geography, where are you going to live, what are you going to do, how are
All
you
of
going
it.
to, you're making all these decisions, and they're hard decisions. And by the way, that's what these overpaid CEOs get paid for, is making really hard decisions.
Sure.
It's no different. And so the truth is, your 5 dimensions of leadership aren't really 5 dimensions of leadership. It's like 5 dimensions of being a human on earth, a
That,
successful,
that's right.
if that's the right word, human
Yeah.
being, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And it goes back to what I said earlier in terms of everybody's a leader.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yes.
And so, to the extent that we're putting these people at the top of a heap in this hierarchical structure that I hope goes away, again, in my lifetime, because I think we
Really?
need a different paradigm. I do.
Goes
And
away.
it needs to be
Where does it
replaced.
go?
It
Where does
needs
it
to be
go, Ginny?
replaced with something different. Do I know what
Like
that is? I
what?
don't know. I
I
don't
want to
know
hear it.
yet.
No, you
I'm
must
working
know
on it.
something. Tell me where does it go? What's your theory?
I mean, I think if nothing else, it's more matrixed. It's not just this pyramid structure that we've kind of
Mm,
created.
Mm.
I think it needs to flatten out. And even in some organizations that are flat, you still, I think the checkpoint becomes, where does, I'm going to use the word again, it's not your favorite, where does the accountability fall?
Yeah.
Um, who's at the table? Who are people making, things have to bubble up at some point to the decisions of one or a few for the rest. And so, to the extent that the decisions are not being made for the benefit of most or all, then I think you have a problem. And it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of capitalism and what that person told you about extracting wealth.
Yeah.
Well, you're obviously not making decisions for others. It's
Yes.
in your own self interest. And I think that has driven the ugly side of capitalism that we're
Yeah.
witnessing and living through.
Yeah. I
So
think
I want to see more equity, right? More balance structurally.
for me, one of the things that Milton Friedman famously in his famous 1970s article talks about is the volition of the leader, or the self-interest, or the agency of the leader. And what's interesting is I believe, my perception is he was critical of leaders through the 40s, 50s, 60s who were using company funds to donate to their local communities and do things like that because they were interested
Mm-hmm.
in the arts, or in the town square, or in whatever they were interested in, baseball, who knows what.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed inappropriate to him that they were allocating shareholders' resources to go toward things that were uniquely interesting to them. But what's ironic is, to your point, if self-interest is taken to the extreme and it's selfish, then the outcomes are pretty obviously bad, usually, ultimately,
Well,
like without some bit of altruism. So how do we
right.
reconcile that?
Well, we got, now the word is philanthropy,
Okay.
right? So now there's a structure that's been placed around that. But again, for who? Where are the philanthropic? These organizations built huge foundations that are giving out money
Yeah.
that seem to be like they're for good. They're helping other people. But then I don't know. There seems to be a bit of a gap. And I'm not saying I'm against philanthropy. I'm not.
Yeah. What are you saying?
Well, but I'm seeing we've got workers, we've got employees who are not being fairly compensated, who are suffering with mental health
Mm-hmm.
issues, who are
Mm-hmm.
stressed, who are frustrated. Yeah, hold on. Is she here? Yeah. Come here, Pumpkin. I'm sorry, hold on.
No,
My little dog.
bring her in.
Nika,
Bring the dog
come
on the
here,
pod.
Pumpkin. I will.
We welcome
I
all
will. She's
dogs.
getting water. Okay, I'm sorry. I haven't
Good.
seen her all week, so she
Good.
she had to
No,
come in and say hello.
yeah, for sure.
Come here, sweetie. She's thirsty. She'll be here in a moment. I apologize. I knew that was going to happen. I should have
We're even.
mentioned. I didn't know exactly when she was coming. She was
We
dropped
love
off, but
dogs.
yeah,
We love dogs around here. Don't worry about it.
good, good, good. I'll bring her over in a minute. Um, so yeah, does that this whole idea of philanthropy is great. We've got massive inequities in the workplace with the workforce
Yeah. So
in
I
terms
think
of
what I'm hearing
compensation.
is like inordinate amounts of wealth get siphoned out of these organizations,
Hmm.
uh, for the good or the bad, into very few people's hands. And then, even if those people choose to be magnanimous and donate their money toward whatever it is they choose to donate it toward, they are still uh, captaining organizations where they could be doing a lot more good somehow inside of those organizations where they hold great sway. Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying?
yeah.
Hmm.
And again, it's like, who are you making decisions for? And this is where I'm trying to go. And I know it sounds simplistic, but everyone And when I had my teams at Google in particular, I always tried to make decisions that were in the best interest of most, if not all,
Mm-hmm.
at least most people. And I think people aren't, they don't think that way. It's, okay, well, how's this going to look for me? Am I going to look okay? Right.
Yeah.
And that's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's who are you trying to serve?
Mm-hmm.
It's some of the essence of servant leadership, right?
Yeah. This is one reason that I'm so disappointed in the conscious capitalism movement,
Yeah.
not because of the content, which is, I think, fundamental. And to your point, so much of it is the way it should be, in my opinion. It's a great book. It's a great concept. Stakeholder capitalism, like considering all of the people, not just the employees. What about the employees' families? What about
How about
the
that?
communities those employees operate in, whether it's
Yeah.
concentrated or not concentrated, whatever. It goes on and on. The environment from which all of the wood and foam and fabric that my couches are made from are sucked out
Mm-hmm.
of,
Mm-hmm.
and no one's compensated for the earth. Like the earth doesn't receive any compensation for our pillaging. And
No.
so anyway, when you consider all these stakeholders, including, of course, and especially the employees that work there, and then shareholders and their rights to the returns as the owners of the company, whatever, when you're operating at that level, outcomes are obviously better if all those things are considered. So this is not
Yeah.
a complicated topic, but what's wild to me is when I go to the Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit in Austin, I all of a sudden am one of the largest companies in attendance. Little dinky Lovesack. And it's embarrassing to me that after all these years and some really great momentum in from a philosophical standpoint, at least, that movement is not strong. And people celebrate the words and they may read the book, I don't know, but it has not caught on like you would expect after a few decades of energy.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's telling. I think in the end, here's my belief, Ginny. I think in the end, most executives and leaders or whatever succumb to the wealth extraction game. I just think it's too powerful. I think, by the way, the same is true in our government. I mean,
Yeah.
to be really crass about it, I just
Sure.
think that I've
Power.
never met a poor senator.
Right.
And I've known plenty
Mm-hmm.
that took their little, senator's salary and have somehow parlayed it to become multi millionaires. And I'm sorry to go there, but and it's sad to me that is the state of play. But you're the fool if you don't, aren't you? Like if you were somehow in that position and you didn't, you're the one
Mm-hmm.
guy that's still on a professor's, wage, so to speak. Wouldn't you feel
Yeah.
like the fool? And so I think that those
Well, you do.
powers are just too great, Ginny.
Yeah.
The cynic in me. And this is someone who believes in abundance and is not
Yeah.
going to operate from a place of fear,
Yeah.
but being honest about it, that's where I think the world is at.
I agree that that's where it is. And then you look at it and you kind of go, why is it that people like us, you and I, who do believe in consciousness, conscious leadership,
Yeah.
conscious capitalism, why are we not going into some of these leadership roles, whether in corporate or in government?
Yep.
Because we see that a system has been created that doesn't support our values.
Yeah.
And I refuse to succumb to a system that doesn't serve me.
Yeah.
Right now, can I change it? It's hard. Let's face it. It's been hard in my lifetime and in yours, probably long before. But we have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Don't do nothing. I think that
That's right.
I may or may not ever run for office. I mean, that's a whole other realm, honestly. But I will try in my little, organization
Mm-hmm.
to build a place that doesn't suck. Let's start there. To build a place, and it's hard. And
That's
there are
not
so
Shawn.
many.
Wait, I'm stopping you. I'm stopping you because it doesn't suck is not enough.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I'm just, hey,
because
like I said, I just like to say things crassly, but yes.
I get it. But you're triggering the
That's fine.
Google thing of don't be evil.
Oh, God. Oh my gosh.
Okay. Right? I mean, that's one of their,
don't get me started on that one, Ginny.
Well, I'm just saying, it's yours. That's what it triggered for me.
By the way,
Don't be evil.
That's Google's stated purpose at some point, or mantra. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
it is. It is.
Oh, God.
And I thought, well, that's not enough. No,
that's
is
not
it?
enough.
That's not enough. I mean,
All
because
right.
there's a big
I was trying to be
spectrum
humble,
between,
and, you know, like place that doesn't suck. The truth is, look, love sack. I say this all the time. We cannot bear the name love over our door, on our chest, on our t-shirts, on our ticker.
Yeah.
And not make a conscious effort to live up to it. And the reason I put it the way I did, Ginny, is because humbly speaking, man, it's hard. And it's hard to balance all the demands of public shareholders and whatever. And I'm not using that as an excuse. I'm just being honest. You know, I'm being honest. But I will spend the balance of my life trying to. That's really, and by the way, you know how freeing it's been, Ginny, when I made the personal decision. Because I think a lot of people expect me in this role. I'm the founder of a company, you know, at some point when my stock is at a high, to dump all my stock and start surfing a lot and, you know, just be done. And then, or go start another company and make a pile of money, whatever. But I made the decision, like, because we're at the scale we're at Lovesac, and we're bumping up toward $1 billion in sales, and we're starting to matter in the world. Like, we're not even that big, right? But we're not tiny either anymore. And we have 1,500 employees, which is not huge, but it's not nothing. And growing rapidly. Holy crap. We have the chance to build something really like a 100-year brand. And how many people get the chance to do that? And when I say people, I don't mean me. I mean, we. Like, how many humans on the earth get to participate in that? So my point of view shifted to, hey, I'll do this the rest of my life. And our stated purpose, if you're not familiar, you wouldn't be probably, is to inspire humankind to buy better stuff so they can buy less stuff, which is, of course, good in many respects, which is very different than those companies that have become the biggest companies in the world by conning you into buying the same object every year.
And over. I know.
Now your jeans are too big. Now they're too tight. Now they're too baggy. Now they're too, those are all fake forces. Anyway, that's a whole other topic we don't have time for. My point is, though, I am not dispassionate. I just am simply a realist that it is hard and it's going to take decades, and I'm okay with that. And once I became okay with that, I sensed a wave of, look, there's probably people who would love to see me gone. Who knows? You know, you can't love everybody, but from my personal perspective, I'm okay spending as long as it takes to try to build a place that doesn't just not suck, but that is in fact a bastion of the word exemplified that I took to Wall Street. And by the way, it wasn't easy to get that ticker, but I wanted it.
Sure it wasn't.
I wanted it. And so I think we're building something legendary. I support the idea of trying to build great things. And I think that's lost. All the articles we read anymore, Ginny, is how much money someone raised, how much money, you know, someone donated. I know. What about how much goodness someone built? And when I say someone, you know, an organization. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And that's, by the way, the reason I'm doing this podcast and the book. Like, all net proceeds are donated to the FBLA from my book, Future Business Leaders of America. This podcast has no advertisers. People like you come on and just share a wealth of knowledge. Really grateful to you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to, you know, congratulate you on all that you've done and continue to show up. And this is what we have to do. If 1 million other business owners oriented themselves this way and committed to acting this way and serving others in this way, things will change. They will change.
Business is powerful too. Business is powerful. Like, I mean, it is most of the people. The government is a thing, but business is not nothing. And in some ways you could say business runs the show. It probably does.
I think it
does. But those are waters that are deeper and darker than I'm ready to unpack.
We'll save that for another conversation.
If you don't mind, let's have another conversation someday. I mean, let's stay in touch. Ginny.
Oh, I would love it.
Oh, Anything you want to plug? Anything you're doing these days that you want to get out there before we wrap?
I'm working on some courses, some online courses. I did one last year on the 5 dimensions of leadership called Fifth Dimensional Leadership, and we'll be offering some in the coming months that are asynchronous, where they won't be live, but you'll get the essence of the content. And I'm going to be out there. I'm coming out, up and out. Yeah, more and more.
I like your vibe. I like your sincerity.
Thank you.
I will be signing up. We will be signing our people up. Whatever. We'll be working together. You can follow
keep doing what you're doing.
Oh man. As I do, at Ginny _Clarke with an E on Instagram, or on X, Ginny Clarke, at her own website, ginnyclarke.com. And listen to her podcast that she hosts, the Fifth Dimensional Leadership Podcast, on whatever platform you like. Please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast or video. Please give it a star rating. Every little bit makes a huge difference. Thanks in advance. Maybe share it out on social media to help others save a chunk off of their 25-year journey, because you're just that good of a friend. Thank you so much to the Lioness of Leadership, the Rector of Recruiting, the Career Whisperer, the fabulous Ginny Clarke.
You're the best, Shawn. Thank you. I like that Lioness one too.
You can have it. And to everyone listening, don't forget to build a culture where we can all win together. It just might save you 25 years.